never imagined that a family gathering could turn into something like this. The loud chatter of guests, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the laughter of my son and his new bride filled the ballroom. But nothing could prepare me for what was about to happen. The slap came so fast, I didn't have time to react. One moment I was talking to my son, Ethan, and his friends, and the next, my daughter-in-law, Juliet, had slapped me across the face. The noise of the slap echoed through the room, cutting through the laughter and conversations like a knife. My glasses flew off my face, landing on the polished marble floor, shattering with a sharp crack. The room fell into a stunned silence. For a long moment I stood there, frozen, feeling the sting on my cheek. My body was in shock. But the worst pain wasn't in the slap, it was in the humiliation. In front of everyone, in front of my son. I looked around, desperately hoping someone would step in. But no one moved. No one spoke up. They just stared, awkward, uncomfortable, afraid to be caught in the middle of the storm that was my daughter-in-law's rage. And then she spoke. "That's what you get for being so selfish," she yelled, her voice dripping with venom. Her eyes were filled with disdain, her tone sharp and mocking. "A woman your age doesn't need so much space." I felt my heart sink. The pain in my chest was overwhelming. The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel every eye on me, watching as I stood there, shaking, trying to gather myself. Tears started to well up in my eyes, but I fought them back. I wasn't going to let her see me break. Not now, not like this. I crouched down, trembling, to pick up my broken glasses. My fingers were unsteady, my whole body shaking. But as I looked around, no one came to help. Not a single person. Some guests turned away, pretending they hadn't seen anything. Others whispered among themselves, gossiping, no doubt, about the poor old mother-in-law who had just been publicly humiliated. Ethan, my own son, stood there, motionless, his eyes glued to the floor as if I didn't even exist. He didn't say a word, not a single word. Juliet wasn't done. No, she wasn't done making me suffer. "You're not welcome here anymore," she continued, her voice like acid. "Ethan and I need our privacy. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we figure things out. You've overstayed your welcome." Her words hit me like a slap to the face all over again. I couldn't believe it. Was this really happening? She had been trying to get me to give up my apartment for months. But now, in front of everyone, in front of my son, she was demanding it. For months, I had been biting my tongue, keeping quiet, enduring her cruel comments. The insults about my worn-out clothes, my old car, my modest life. I had taken it all. I thought it would get better, that maybe one day she would change. But today, she crossed a line. I stood up slowly, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on me. They were waiting to see what I would do next. I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment, but inside, something was shifting. A storm was brewing inside me, and for the first time in a long time, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I didn't need to ask for help. I didn't need to explain myself. I just needed to leave. As I walked toward the exit, I felt the sting of their judgment following me. I felt the weight of the years of my silent suffering, the years of pretending that everything was fine. I had kept my mouth shut for so long, trying to keep the peace. But Juliet's slap was the final straw. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. I knew what I had to do, but there was something that none of them knew. They had no idea who I really was. They had no idea what I had been hiding for all these years. I had been playing a role, pretending to be the helpless elderly woman who couldn't take care of herself. They thought I was living in a modest apartment, scraping by on a small pension. But they were wrong. I wasn't just some old widow struggling to survive. No, I had built a life for myself, a life I had kept hidden. And now, after everything, I was done pretending. I took out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't called in over a year. "Carlos, it's Aurora. I need you to come to the Royal Oaks Ballroom immediately. Yes, right now. Bring the documents you know about. It's time for them to know the truth. Carlos was my financial advisor. He knew everything about my real situation. For years, he had helped me keep my wealth hidden, away from prying eyes. But now it was time to show my son, my daughter-in-law, and everyone else exactly who I was. "Are you sure, Mrs. Hughes?" Carlos asked, his voice cautious but understanding. "Once we do this, there's no going back." "I'm completely sure," I said. 30 minutes, Carlos. No more." I hung up the phone and stared at the ballroom doors. Inside, Juliet and Ethan were probably still celebrating, oblivious to what was coming. They thought they had won. But in just 30 minutes, everything was about to change. I wasn't the weak, helpless woman they thought I was. I had the power to turn the tables. And when they learned the truth about me, about the life I had kept hidden, they would understand the real meaning of regret. I looked up at the sky, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. This was my moment, the moment I had been waiting for. It was time to take control of my life once and for all. And nothing, not even my own family, could take that away from me. I sat in my car, the engine still running, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The night air was cool, but it felt like an oven inside the car. I was fighting back tears, but there was something else rising within me. Anger, frustration, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I had spent my life trying to keep peace, to remain unnoticed, to protect my family from the truth. But today, all of that changed. I thought back to the beginning, to when I first met Juliet, when she first came into our lives, when everything seemed so promising. Ethan had been so happy, so excited to introduce her to me. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special," he had said that day, his eyes filled with that naive sparkle of someone in love. He had been just a boy to me then, still the same little boy who ran to me for comfort when he was scared, when he needed advice. But I should have known then, things were different. I had noticed the way Juliet looked at me from the very start. Her smile seemed fake, too perfect. And when she looked around my apartment, I saw that look, disdain, judgment, right there in her eyes. "How cozy," she had said, her voice almost dripping with sarcasm. I knew what she was thinking. She didn't need to say it out loud. It was written all over her face. This apartment, the very place where I had raised my son, the place where I had lived quietly with my husband before he passed, was beneath her. It wasn't just the apartment. It was everything. My clothes, my car, my lifestyle. The little things that once brought me comfort. She had subtly, time after time, found ways to make me feel inferior, like I was somehow a burden to them. Juliet didn't have the decency to hide it, but Ethan, my dear son, couldn't see it. He was blinded by love, or at least what he thought was love. And over time, the comments became sharper, more cutting. "Aurora, don't you think it's time you downsized? You can't maintain such a big place at your age." Her voice was always sweet, but there was an undertone of cruelty, a veiled insult that stung more than she knew. She had been playing her cards carefully, slowly building up this narrative of me as weak, incapable, someone who needed help. It started with the suggestions. "Why don't you move to a smaller place? There are lovely homes for people your age." It was always under the guise of concern. "Have you thought about retirement homes, Aurora? You wouldn't have to worry about anything." The pressure built quietly, almost imperceptibly, but I could feel it. Feel the subtle tightening of the noose around my neck, and I began to feel the walls closing in on me, as if my own son was no longer seeing me, the mother who had cared for him, but a problem, an inconvenience. Ethan started to echo Juliet's words. "Mom, I think Juliet's right. Maybe you should consider moving to a smaller place. I'm really concerned about you being alone in such a big apartment." My heart broke. He was the same son who used to run into my arms for comfort. Now he was parroting everything Juliet told him, as if I were some helpless old woman who couldn't think for myself. But this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface. As much as Juliet tried to hide it, I began to notice the way she spoke to Ethan, the way she manipulated him, controlled him. It was subtle at first, like a snake slowly coiling around its prey, but it was clear now. She wasn't just after my apartment. She was after everything I had. And Ethan, my sweet, naive son, was too blinded by love to see it. I remember the first time I overheard her on the phone, speaking in hushed tones while I was in the kitchen. I hadn't meant to listen in, but her words cut through the air like a knife. "His mom's apartment is in a prime location," she said, her voice low but unmistakable. "If we can get her to move, we can stay there while we look for something better. She's so naive, she'll probably thank us for helping her make the transition." Those words hit me harder than any slap ever could. They weren't just about an apartment, they were about my entire life. My son, the boy I had raised with so much love, was now the target of her manipulation. And he didn't even know it. I knew then, deep down, that something had to change. I had to do something. But I couldn't let my son see the truth. I couldn't let him see how far Juliet had taken things. I had always kept my wealth hidden from everyone, even from him. I had carefully cultivated an image of modesty, of simplicity, because that's what I thought I had to do. I didn't want anyone to know what Robert and I had built. We had always valued our privacy over everything else. The wealth we accumulated wasn't for showing off. It was for security. But as Juliet's plans unfolded, I realized I had made a mistake. Keeping everything secret had only worked against me. It had made me invisible, vulnerable. They saw me as weak, as someone they could push around, someone who would never fight back. But I wasn't weak, and I wasn't going to let them take everything I had worked for. There was so much they didn't know about me. They didn't know that Robert and I had built a fortune over the years, that our modest home wasn't the only thing we owned. They didn't know that the woman they saw as an old widow with a small pension was actually someone with millions in hidden accounts, with investments in properties all over the city. And now, Juliet had crossed a line. That slap wasn't just an act of cruelty. It was a declaration. She had made it clear that she wasn't going to stop until she had everything. And it was in that moment, as I stood there in the ballroom, humiliated and broken, that I realized I had to stop playing along. I had to take control of my life once again. I remembered the words of my husband, Robert. "Invisible wealth gives you power." He had always said that, and I had believed it. But now I saw the truth. My silence, my modesty, had only made me a target. It had allowed them to see me as something to be used, something to be taken advantage of. I couldn't let this continue. I glanced back at the ballroom doors, where Juliet and Ethan were still celebrating, oblivious to the storm that was coming. I knew I had to act, and I had to act fast. The moment I had been dreading had arrived, but it was also the moment that would change everything. As I sat there, waiting for Carlos to arrive, my mind raced through everything that had led up to this point. The lies, the manipulation, the slow erosion of my dignity. I had to do this, not for me, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel small, overlooked, or discarded. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. Not my son, not my dignity, and certainly not my future. As the minutes passed, I could feel the weight of the decision I was about to make. I wasn't just going to expose Juliet's lies. I was going to expose everything. I was going to show Ethan exactly who his mother had become. And I was going to show Juliet that she had underestimated me. The moment had come, and I was ready. I stared at the ballroom doors from my car, my heart still pounding in my chest. The overwhelming rush of emotions was starting to settle into a calm determination. I was no longer the woman who had silently accepted the cruel words and manipulations of my daughter-in-law. The time had come to stand up for myself, not just for me, but for the principles I had spent a lifetime building. I had spent years hiding my wealth, believing that keeping it a secret was the best way to protect my family from envy and greed. Robert and I had always been careful, always choosing to live simply, even though we had the means for much more. We didn't need a grand house or flashy cars. We had our modest apartment, our simple life, and our love for each other. But all along, we had built something much bigger, something that would now be my shield against the world that had started to close in on me. Robert had been the one who taught me the importance of discretion. "Invisible wealth gives you power," he would often say. We didn't need to flaunt our riches. Our life was about quality, not quantity. We had invested wisely, quietly, and with a long-term perspective. But now, as I sat alone in my car, the weight of all those hidden investments pressed heavily on my mind. Juliet had no idea what she had just unleashed. She thought she could push me around, that she could take everything from me. She thought I was weak. But she didn't know the truth. The truth was, my life had not been about modesty out of necessity. It was out of choice. I could have been flaunting money, driving luxury cars, and living in a mansion if I had wanted to. But that's not how Robert and I had lived. We had chosen to keep our wealth hidden because we valued peace, privacy, and security above all else. Our home, while small in size, was filled with memories and love. It had been our haven, the place where we had built our life together. But it wasn't just the apartment. It was everything we had built, the business, the investments, the portfolio of properties. It was all there, and Juliet had no idea what she was dealing with. I had always believed that my family's privacy was worth more than any material possession. I had made the decision to live simply, to blend in, to avoid the spotlight. But now, as I thought about the slap Juliet had delivered to my face, I realized how much that had worked against me. They had seen me as weak. They had assumed I was just an old widow scraping by. They thought I had nothing to offer. But what they didn't know was that all this time I had been protecting them, protecting my son, protecting my family. I had hidden my wealth to keep them from fighting over it, to keep them from taking it for granted. But now I had been forced to reveal the truth. Juliet had crossed the line. Her cruelty, her manipulation, her sense of entitlement, she had gone too far. And I could no longer stand by and watch as she and Ethan, my son, tore apart everything I had worked so hard to build. I was done pretending. I was done being silent. As I sat there, waiting for Carlos to arrive with the documents that would change everything, my mind wandered back to the early days with Juliet. How had it all gone so wrong? How had this woman, who had once seemed so sweet, so eager to please, turned into someone so callous and greedy? I remembered the first time I met her parents. Juliet had introduced them to me as if I were supposed to be impressed. "This is my mom, this is my dad," she said, her voice dripping with an arrogance I hadn't noticed at the time. They were exactly the kind of people I had always tried to avoid. People who saw others as tools to be used, resources to be exploited. The first sign that something was off came when they started to question my finances. "Aurora," Juliet's mother said, "how do you manage living alone on a widow's pension?" She wasn't asking out of concern. She was asking because she wanted to know how much I had. She wanted to know if there was something she could take. I had brushed it off at the time, but now I understood exactly what was happening. Juliet wasn't concerned about me. She was concerned about my money. And then came the subtle manipulations. "You know, Aurora," Juliet would say, "at your age, you shouldn't be working anymore. You should be relaxing, enjoying your life. Let someone else take care of you." The first time she said it, I had brushed it off as well. I had worked all my life. I had never been one to sit idly by. I wasn't about to start now. But it wasn't just about my work. It was about control. She wanted me to stop working so I would be forced to rely on her and Ethan to make me dependent on them. It was a slow burn, a gradual process of wearing me down, making me feel insignificant, unwanted. But I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't let her take my life away from me. I had worked too hard. I had given up too much. I had made too many sacrifices. And now, in that ballroom, standing in front of me, was a woman who thought she could strip me of everything I had, all in the name of her own selfish desires. She had crossed the line. And in that moment, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let her win. I knew that once I took this step, there would be no going back. My son, my own flesh and blood, would have to face the consequences of his actions. And as much as I loved him, I couldn't keep protecting him from the truth. He needed to see who Juliet really was. He needed to see the woman he had married for who she truly was. Someone who was willing to humiliate me, to strip me of everything, all for her own gain. Carlos arrived, and as he handed me the stack of legal documents, I felt the weight of what was about to happen settle on my shoulders. I had kept my wealth hidden for so long, but now, the time had come to reveal it. The time had come to show my son and Juliet the real Aurora Hughes. As I looked at the documents Carlos handed me, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The truth was out. The battle was just beginning, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had spent my life protecting my family from the truth, protecting them from the greed that could tear us apart. But now, the truth would be my weapon, and nothing, not even my son, would be able to take that from me. I looked at the ballroom doors one last time. Inside, I knew Juliet and Ethan were celebrating, unaware of the storm that was coming. They thought they had won. They thought they had everything under control. But they hadn't seen the woman who had been silently protecting them for years. I wasn't the weak, helpless widow they thought I was. I was stronger than they could ever imagine. And tonight, I was going to show them exactly who they were dealing with. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. As I sat in the car staring at the ballroom doors, a strange calm settled over me. The overwhelming mix of emotions, the rage, the humiliation, the pain, was slowly being replaced by something stronger, something more resolute. I had spent too many years watching my son and his wife manipulate me, letting them think that I was just an old widow with no power, no resources. They had thought I was weak, a mere pawn in their games, but I was done pretending. I was done letting them control the narrative. I had always kept my wealth hidden, a decision Robert and I had made together when we were young. We had learned early on that visible wealth only brought problems: greed, jealousy, betrayal. Robert was the one who taught me to live simply, to blend in, to avoid the spotlight. And so, we had. We lived in a modest apartment, drove old cars, and dressed plainly. We didn't need more. We didn't want more. But beneath the surface, we had built something far greater than anyone had known. We had made investments, bought properties, and carefully hidden our wealth. All of it was meant to protect our family, to provide for our future without the complications of showing it off. But Juliet had seen through it. She had sensed something, though she didn't know the full extent. She had started with subtle comments, little digs about my home, my clothes, my car. It was as if she was testing the waters, trying to see if I would bite, if I would let slip that I had something more than what I appeared to have. At first, I ignored it. I brushed it off as harmless criticism. After all, she was my son's wife. She wasn't going anywhere. I didn't want to cause trouble. But as time went on, I began to see the pattern. It wasn't just about making me feel small. It was about getting something from me. Her constant comments about downsizing, about moving to a retirement home, about letting go of the past. It wasn't concern. It wasn't kindness. It was manipulation. She was laying the groundwork to take what she thought she could get from me, to turn my life upside down in the name of convenience. And Ethan, my son, had begun parroting her words. "Mom, maybe it's time you moved to a smaller place. Maybe you should think about moving somewhere safer." The subtle shift in his tone made my heart ache. The son I had raised, the boy who had once clung to me for comfort, now saw me as a burden, as something to be discarded. His loyalty had shifted. It wasn't to me anymore. It was to Juliet and her plans. I had to remind myself of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just a daughter-in-law who wanted me to be comfortable. This was a woman who had orchestrated an entire scheme to take my home, to take my life, and to twist it to her own advantage. I could see it now, the way she had manipulated Ethan into believing it was all for my own good. They both wanted my apartment. No, my life. They wanted everything, and I had let it happen. I had let them make me feel small, like I had no place in their world. But that slap, in front of everyone, that was the breaking point. It wasn't just about the physical blow. It was the public humiliation, the total disregard for my dignity. It was the final act of control. I had to show them that I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a helpless old woman to be taken advantage of. I was Aurora Hughes, and I had worked too hard for everything I had to let them take it from me. I could hear Juliet's voice in my mind as I sat there in the car, reflecting on everything. "You're not welcome here anymore," she had said. "Ethan and I need our privacy. Your apartment would be perfect for us." I could almost hear the arrogance in her voice, the entitlement, as if I had no right to stand my ground. As if I had no right to exist outside the little box she had created for me. I wasn't a person to her. I was a resource, a stepping stone to whatever she and Ethan wanted to achieve. And that was when it hit me. I had been living my life in the shadows, hiding my true self from the world, from my family. I had built a fortress around my life, my wealth, my history, my strength. But it was time to tear down the walls. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to let them see the woman I really was. The woman they had underestimated. I could feel the power rising within me. The moment had come. I had always kept quiet, always played the role of the meek, humble widow. But that was no longer who I was. I wasn't going to play the fool any longer. If Juliet and Ethan thought they could walk all over me, if they thought they could take everything from me, they were about to learn the truth. I looked at my phone. Carlos was on his way. Carlos, my financial advisor, my trusted confidant, the one person who knew the truth about my wealth. He was the one I had turned to when Robert passed away, the one who had helped me keep everything in order, who had kept my secrets safe. But tonight, everything was going to change. Carlos was bringing the documents that would expose everything I had kept hidden for so long. I wasn't going to wait any longer. I wasn't going to be intimidated or pushed aside. I was going to take control. And when I walked into that ballroom, when I faced my son and his wife, I was going to show them who I really was. They thought they knew me. They thought they understood me, but they didn't. The roar of the engine started as I turned the key, breaking me from my thoughts. I glanced back at the ballroom one last time. I could see the lights flickering in the windows, the shadows of guests milling about inside. The celebration continued, completely unaware of the storm that was coming. Inside, Juliet was likely still gloating, reveling in her victory over me. But she had no idea what was about to happen. The truth would come out, and it would shatter everything she and Ethan thought they knew. I took a deep breath and pulled out of the parking lot, making my way toward the ballroom. My heart was racing, but I felt no fear. There was nothing to fear anymore. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I would take back control of my life, the moment I would show my son and his wife that I wasn't some helpless old woman to be discarded. I was going to walk into that ballroom with my head held high. And when they saw me, they would see the woman who had silently carried the weight of their world on her shoulders. They would see the woman who had kept them afloat for years, and they would understand. They would understand what it meant to be underestimated. And they would regret every moment they had spent trying to take everything from me. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. It was time for them to learn the truth about who I was, and nothing could stop me now. As I approached the ballroom, my mind raced with a mixture of emotions, determination, anger, and a strange sense of clarity. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment that would change everything. And I was ready. For so long, I had lived a life of quiet sacrifice, trying to protect my family from the truths I kept hidden. But the time for secrets was over. They were about to see the real me. When I entered the ballroom, the sounds of the celebration abruptly faded into the background. I could feel the eyes of everyone on me. All 130 guests, their faces frozen in shock, as if they couldn't believe what was happening. The room, once filled with laughter and joy, now held an uncomfortable stillness that only heightened the tension in the air. Juliet was in the center, wearing that smug, self-satisfied smile that I had come to loathe, standing beside Ethan, whose face was pale, his expression shifting between confusion and unease. The moment I walked through those doors, I could feel the gravity of the situation. It wasn't just a family feud anymore. It was a war, one that had been building for years, and now the battle lines were finally drawn. I wasn't just walking into a wedding reception anymore. I was walking into the final confrontation that would shatter everything they thought they knew about me. The first to react was Juliet, of course. She had to be the one to speak, to try to regain control of the situation. Her face tightened with the kind of arrogance that only someone completely unaware of the consequences could display. "What are you doing here, Aurora?" she sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "You already left once. Wasn't that enough drama for one night?" I didn't flinch. I stood tall, my gaze unwavering. "I've come to tell you the truth, Juliet," I said, my voice steady but firm. "The truth about who I really am, and I've come to make sure you understand the consequences of your actions." Her face twisted in confusion, and for a brief moment I saw the uncertainty flicker behind her eyes. She wasn't as confident as she had been just moments before. She had thought she had won, thought she could humiliate me and take everything I had without anyone ever finding out the truth. But tonight, the tables were turning. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued, my voice louder now, "I apologize for interrupting your celebration, but I think it's time for you all to hear what's been happening behind the scenes." The guests began to stir, some shifting uncomfortably, others whispering to each other, sensing the shift in the air. Carlos stepped forward, holding a folder of documents in his hands. He was calm, professional, but there was an undeniable sense of authority in his presence. "Mrs. Hughes," he began, addressing me formally but with the utmost respect, "I believe the documents we have will shed some light on the situation." I looked at Juliet and Ethan, their eyes widening as Carlos opened the folder. The air was thick with anticipation, the guests on the edge of their seats, waiting for the truth to come out. "You see, Juliet," I said, my voice cold but controlled, "for years, I have been quietly supporting you both. I've been covering your debts, your expenses, all while you tried to make me feel worthless. But tonight, you're going to learn the truth." Carlos handed me the first document, and I looked directly at my son, whose face was now flushed with a mix of fear and confusion. "You see, Ethan," I said, my eyes locking with his, "for the past few years, I've been helping you. The car you drive, the apartment you live in, the wedding you're about to celebrate, it's all been funded by me." Ethan blinked, as if trying to process what I was saying. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Juliet's eyes darted between the document and my face, disbelief creeping into her expression. Carlos continued to read aloud from the document. "This document shows a series of monthly transfers made from Mrs. Hughes's account to your personal account. The total amount transferred is well over $150,000. Payments for your rent, your car, your credit cards, everything you thought you were handling yourself, all covered by your mother." The room was silent now, the guests staring in shock. Juliet's face drained of color, and I could see the realization beginning to hit her. This wasn't just a wealthy, old woman they could manipulate for her apartment. This was a woman who had been silently supporting them, allowing them to live a lifestyle they couldn't afford. I could see Ethan's expression shift from confusion to anger. "Mom, what is this?" he finally managed to choke out. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say anything?" I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I handed the next document to Carlos, who continued. "This document shows the amount of money Mrs. Hughes has spent in recent years covering expenses for Ethan and Juliet. The total sum includes over $30,000 in wedding costs, along with personal loans and financial guarantees she has provided for you." Juliet's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She was silent, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. "No," she finally whispered, barely audible, her voice shaking. "This can't be true." I felt no sympathy. None. "The truth hurts, doesn't it, Juliet?" I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "You've been playing a game thinking that I was just an old woman who couldn't take care of herself. You thought I didn't have anything. But you were wrong. You have no idea what I've been quietly doing for you, for Ethan." Ethan looked at me, his anger now mixed with something else. guilt. "But why didn't you say anything?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why let us believe we were doing everything ourselves?" I shook my head. "Because, Ethan, I didn't want you to know. I wanted you to learn how to stand on your own. I didn't want you to become dependent on me. I wanted to see if you would make the right choices, if you would choose your family over greed." He looked away, his face contorted with shame. I didn't know how bad things had gotten." "No," I said, my voice firm. "You didn't. And that's the problem, Ethan. You've been so blinded by love and ambition that you lost sight of what really mattered: family, respect, honor. And now, you've lost both." I turned to Juliet. "And you, Juliet, you thought you could get away with this. You thought you could take everything from me. But you didn't realize that I wasn't the one you should have been watching. It was Ethan who should have been your concern. You were playing with fire, and now you're getting burned." Carlos cleared his throat and began reading from the final document. "This document is a legal notice of cancellation. Mrs. Hughes has decided to withdraw all financial support, including the funds used to guarantee the wedding costs." He paused and looked directly at Ethan. "This includes the $53,000 that was paid up front for this event, which will no longer be covered." The room erupted into murmurs of shock and disbelief. Some guests were shaking their heads, while others pulled out their phones, no doubt ready to record the drama unfolding before them. Juliet's face crumpled as she realized the gravity of the situation. "You can't do this," she shouted, her voice high-pitched and frantic. "You can't ruin our wedding. We've planned everything. This is all for us." I stepped forward, my heels clicking sharply on the marble floor, a deliberate move to emphasize my presence. "I didn't ruin anything, Juliet," I said calmly, but with a cutting edge. "You did. You chose greed over love, manipulation over honesty. You thought you could strip me of my dignity, take what I worked my whole life for, and get away with it. But now you see that there are consequences to your actions." Ethan finally approached me, his face softening as his anger gave way to confusion and desperation. "Mom, please," he pleaded. "I didn't know about all this. I didn't know you had been covering for us. But this isn't the way to handle things. We're family. We should be able to work this out." I shook my head. "We are family, Ethan, but family isn't built on lies. It's not built on manipulation and betrayal. Family is about respect, and right now you've lost my respect." I turned to the guests, my voice carrying over the room. "This is what happens when people think they can take advantage of others, when they think they can manipulate and deceive. But what they don't realize is that the truth always comes out in the end. And when it does, it changes everything." I looked back at Ethan and Juliet, my heart heavy but resolute. "You wanted to destroy me, but you've destroyed yourselves instead." The room fell into a thick silence. The silence that followed was deafening. The once lively atmosphere of the ballroom, filled with music and laughter, now felt like a graveyard. The weight of the truth hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, I saw it reflected in the eyes of those around me. Some of the guests looked uncomfortable, as if they had been caught in the middle of something far more intense than they had anticipated. Others seemed curious, unable to look away from the unfolding drama, as if they had just witnessed the breaking of a perfect facade. But I wasn't looking at them. My eyes were on Ethan and Juliet. The shock on Ethan's face was unmistakable. His earlier anger had faded into disbelief, replaced by the dawning realization that everything I had just revealed was true. He was standing there, his mouth open, trying to find words, but nothing came out. It was as if he had been struck dumb by the enormity of what he had just learned. I could see him processing everything, the fact that I had been secretly supporting his life, the life he thought was built on his own success. He had never known. He never understood how deep the manipulation had gone. And Juliet, standing beside him, was not much better. She had no words left. The smugness that had once radiated from her had faded completely. Now she stood there, pale and trembling, as if the reality of her actions was slowly sinking in. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her mind, trying to calculate her next move, to salvage whatever dignity she thought she still had. But there was no going back from this. There was no way to undo what had been exposed. Carlos stood by my side, ever calm and professional, but I could see a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. He had always been the one to help me navigate the financial maze of my life, and now, seeing everything fall into place, I knew that this was just the beginning. This was more than just a financial matter. It was about dignity, respect, and the power to reclaim control over my own life. Ethan finally broke the silence. His voice was shaky, and there was a look of desperation in his eyes. "Mom?" he started, his voice cracking. I didn't know you were helping us like this. I had no idea." I saw the conflict in his eyes. He was torn between the reality of what I had just revealed and the guilt of being complicit in Juliet's actions. I could feel his internal struggle. It was the same conflict I had seen in him before, when he had been faced with a choice, to follow Juliet's lead or to listen to his conscience. But now, the truth had come crashing down, and he could no longer ignore it. "I thought you were doing this out of love," he continued, his voice quiet. I thought you were just being kind, trying to help us. But I didn't know it was like this. I didn't know you were covering everything for us, hiding everything from me." The words stung, but I didn't let them show. "You thought I was just being kind?" I repeated, my voice low but steady. "Ethan, love is not about hiding the truth. Love is about honesty, about respect. You've been lied to, manipulated by the very person you thought you could trust the most." I paused, my heart heavy as I looked at him. "And the worst part is, you let it happen. You let her treat me like this. You stood by while she humiliated me, while she tried to take everything I've worked for." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him a chance. "You didn't just betray me, Ethan. You betrayed yourself. You betrayed everything we built as a family. And for what? For a wedding? For an apartment?" I shook my head, my disappointment weighing heavily on me. "You wanted to help her tear me down, to push me aside, because it was easier than facing the truth. But look at where we are now. You've lost everything, your dignity, your integrity, your family." Juliet stepped forward, trying to regain some semblance of control. She was shaking now, her voice thin and tremulous. "You don't understand," she said, her words almost pleading. "We were just trying to make things work. We needed that apartment. We needed that money. You were always so distant, so secretive. We didn't know what else to do." She paused, glancing nervously at Ethan, who was standing silently beside her. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, but you just kept pushing me away. You wouldn't help us when we asked. I had no choice but to take matters into my own hands." I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her vulnerability. It wasn't genuine remorse, but it was something else. Fear. She was afraid of what would happen now. She was afraid of losing everything she thought she had secured. But I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. Not this time. "You had a choice, Juliet," I said, my voice sharp. "You always had a choice. You could have chosen to respect me, to honor the family we had. But instead, you chose greed. You chose manipulation. And now you're standing here, trying to justify it all, trying to blame me for what you've done." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "You wanted to strip me of everything, my home, my life, and for what? To build your own little empire, to control everything around you? Well, that's over now." The room was still silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Guests shifted uneasily in their seats, unsure of what would happen next. I could hear the faint murmur of voices as people began to whisper, trying to make sense of what was unfolding before them. But I didn't care about their opinions. This wasn't for them. This was for me. Ethan seemed to shrink as the truth settled in. He had been caught in the web of lies, and now it was all crumbling around him. "Mom," he said again, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I didn't see it. I didn't see what she was doing." He looked at Juliet as if searching for an answer. But we can fix this, can't we? We can make it right. We can work it out, please. I shook my head slowly, my gaze softening for a moment, but my resolve remained strong. No, Ethan. We can't fix this. Not this time. I looked at him one last time, my heart heavy with the weight of what had transpired. You can't undo what's been done, and you can't undo the choices you've made. There was a long pause before I turned my attention back to Juliet. As for you, Juliet, I said, my voice cold, you will never control me again. I've spent too many years hiding in the shadows, trying to protect a family that didn't respect me. That ends now. Carlos stepped forward, his professional demeanor never wavering. Mrs. Hughes, he said, addressing me with a note of finality. All documents have been delivered. The legal actions are in place. As we discussed, the financial guarantees have been rescinded, and the full amount due from the wedding event must now be settled immediately. I nodded, taking the final step in the journey that had started the moment Juliet slapped me in the face. This was the moment I had waited for. The moment I would no longer be silent. The moment I would stand up for myself, no matter the cost. Juliet's face contorted with fury and disbelief, but there was nothing she could do now. Ethan, too, looked lost, as if the ground beneath him had suddenly crumbled away. They had no idea what they had set in motion when they thought they could humiliate me, when they thought they could take everything I had. You'll never have what I have, I said to them one last time. Not through manipulation, not through lies. You've lost everything, and the only thing left for you now is to face the consequences of your actions. And with that, I turned and walked out of the ballroom, the sound of my heels echoing in the silence behind me. As I reached the doors, I knew that this chapter of my life had ended. It wasn't just about the money or the apartment. It was about something deeper. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my respect, and my power. I wasn't just walking away from a wedding reception. I was walking away from a life that had tried to strip me of everything, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. As I walked away from the ballroom, the weight of everything that had just happened began to settle in. I could hear the faint murmurs from the guests inside, the hushed conversations, the whispered questions about what they had just witnessed. But I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me there. The world they had created, the facade they had built to justify their greed and manipulation, was crumbling, and I no longer had any part in it. I stepped into my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel. My heart was pounding in my chest, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins, but a strange sense of relief began to wash over me. I had done it. I had finally stood up for myself. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my life again. The choices I had made, the decisions I had put off for so long, had finally come to a head. As I drove away, my mind wandered back to the beginning of my relationship with Ethan and Juliet, the early days when everything seemed so hopeful, when I thought I had raised a son who valued honesty, respect, and love. But somehow, over time, everything had changed. The love I had given them had been used against me, twisted into a weapon of manipulation and deceit. I thought back to the moment when Juliet first entered our lives. Ethan had been so excited to introduce her to me. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special," he had said, his face glowing with that youthful enthusiasm, the same enthusiasm he had shown when he was a child. He had always been so eager to share his happiness with me, to bring me into his world. But that world had changed. From the very start, I had sensed something was off. Juliet's smile had been too perfect, her tone too sweet. And yet, when I looked into her eyes, I saw something cold, something calculating. She had played the part of the loving fiancée perfectly, but I could see the underlying ambition in her. She wasn't interested in my son because she loved him. She was interested in what he could offer her, what we could offer her. The first time I had seen it was when she made a comment about my apartment. "This is where Ethan's mother lives?" she had asked, her voice just loud enough for me to hear, her gaze sweeping over my modest home with disdain. She had tried to hide it, but I saw it. the judgment, the superiority. It had stung, but I brushed it off. I told myself it was just nerves, that she was adjusting to being part of our family. But deep down, I knew that look wasn't just about my home. It was about me. As time passed, the comments became more frequent, more pointed. "You should really think about moving, Aura," she would say, her voice dripping with faux concern. "You're not getting any younger, and that apartment is too big for you." It wasn't concern. It was a strategy. A calculated move to make me feel small, to convince me that my life had no value unless it fit into the neat little box she was trying to build for us. And Ethan, my dear son, had been blind to it all. He had become her puppet, her instrument in this plan to take what was mine. The son I had raised with love and care, who had once been so sensitive and caring, was now so enthralled by his new life that he couldn't even see the woman he had married for what she really was. A manipulator. A woman who had slowly and methodically wormed her way into our lives, all in the name of securing her future. At first, it had been small things, innocent comments, casual suggestions. "Aurora, I've seen some beautiful apartments that might be perfect for you. They come with all kinds of amenities, and they'd be much easier for you to manage at your age." The pressure was subtle at first, but it built up over time. It was as if she were planting seeds of doubt in my mind, convincing me that I was too old to live on my own, that I needed to move, to downsize, to give up everything I had worked for. And it wasn't just about my apartment. It was about my car, my clothes, my life. The way I lived was a constant source of ridicule for Juliet. My worn-out shoes, my old car, my simple, modest clothing, all of it was beneath her. "Why do you still work, Aura?" she would ask me, her voice full of mock sympathy. "At your age, you should be relaxing, enjoying the fruits of your labor." But the truth was, I didn't need to relax. I didn't need to sit idle. I worked because I wanted to, because it kept me connected to the world around me. But she couldn't understand that. To her, I was an old woman who should have been content to fade into the background, to disappear, to let them take everything from me. I had started to feel the pressure building, the whispers, the judgments, the manipulation. It all started to take a toll. And yet I kept my head down. I stayed quiet, believing that if I just played along, if I kept giving, it would all work out. But then, when I needed my son the most, when I needed him to stand up for me, he didn't. He stood by, silent, complicit in Juliet's plans. And then came the slap. The sting of it was still fresh in my mind. The pain in my cheek was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. In front of everyone, in front of 130 people, she had slapped me. For what? For refusing to hand over the keys to my apartment? For refusing to let her have everything she wanted? The audacity of it all took my breath away. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I could no longer stay silent. I could no longer be the woman in the background, the one who let everyone walk all over her. No more. That slap was the final straw. It was the moment I knew that I could never let them take control again. I had spent too many years protecting them, protecting the family, and in return, they had humiliated me, used me, and taken advantage of my kindness. But not anymore. I remembered the words Robert had said to me so many times. Invisible wealth gives you power. Robert and I had made a conscious decision to live simply, to protect our privacy, to keep our wealth hidden. But that had been our choice. And now it was time to reveal the truth. To show them all that I wasn't the helpless old woman they had thought I was. As I drove away from the ballroom, I knew that everything had changed. The moment I had been dreading had finally come, but it had also freed me. I wasn't the same person I had been before. I wasn't the woman who had silently accepted the humiliation. I was someone new, someone who had taken control of her life once again. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The future was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let anyone walk all over me again. Not my son, not Juliet, and certainly not anyone else who thought they could take what was mine. I didn't know what the next chapter of my life would bring, but I knew that I was no longer afraid. I had faced the truth, and I had fought back. And that made all the difference. As I pulled into my driveway, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The house that Juliet had once coveted was now my sanctuary once again. It wasn't just a house, it was a home, filled with memories of Robert, of our life together, of everything we had built. And now, it was mine. I had reclaimed my dignity. I had reclaimed my life, and nothing, not even my own flesh and blood, could take that away from me. I wasn't just a woman who had been wronged. I was a woman who had fought for herself, and that made all the difference. The rest of the world could think what they wanted, but I knew the truth. I was stronger than they ever thought I was, and I would never let anyone forget it again. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this powerful story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing and inspiring tales. Your support means everything. See you next time.